So you see that there's a picture field in this database, okay? Since you just asked a question, I'll leave your picture up, okay? So, what does this field look like in the database? Well, I call it a blob because I like sort of blob. It's a thing. It's just sitting there. You can't do math on it. You can't sort on it. You can't do anything other than look at it, okay? And if you look at the table, this is called the students table, and you go to this photo field, which is here, and you can see that it's an OLE object, which basically means a blob. OLE or OLE stands for Object Linking and Embedding. And if we go here, we go out to photo, the photo field, and you can see that it says it has a picture in there. And if I had my laptop set up right, I could double click on that and see the picture, but I actually don't have my laptop set up right. So you can store a different field type, which is just an object field type. Okay. Next of the loose ends is field names. So this is just everybody has their own pet peeve, and I personally don't like spaces in my field names, and I do like intracaps. So since I get to teach the class, I get to tell you my pet peeve. But you can name your fields however you want to name them. I've told you what my preferences are. That gets us to the question of the front end and the back end. So you now know, having worked in the labs with a database, you know that there's sort of two pieces. There's the data tables, which is where the data are, okay? And in some databases, there's one table, one set of rows and columns, and in other databases, there have to be more than one because there's some data that is exam-specific data and other data that is subject-specific data. And we learned in the first lecture that we should separate those into two different tables and then interlink the tables by connecting them with keys. Or, for example, there is data on lab results, and each patient has multiple labs done, and the lab result data should be kept in a separate table with one row per lab result as compared with the subject data, which should be in a table with one row per study subject. And that would contain patient-specific information like birth date and sex and things like that. So that's where your data are, is in the data tables. And that sometimes is referred to as the back end of the database. And then you learned about forms. In the first lab, you developed a form. In the second lab, you played with some forms that had already been developed, and reports. And forms and reports are for displaying the data that are in the tables. So they're just windows through which you see data that are in the table, and that's sometimes called the front end, okay? Especially if the forms are used for actually collecting the data and entering the data, then that's called the front end. In Access and other desktop databases like FileMaker Pro, and there's an old one which you don't see around much very often called Paradox, desktop databases, you can do both in the same file. So you can develop forms and reports, which is front-end stuff, and you keep all the data in your tables, which is back-end stuff. But even if you're using Access or another desktop database for both your front-end forms and your back-end tables, you should split the two. And we didn't do that in this class, although I did do it with that student database. And one of the reasons is it allows your data entry people and your data viewing people and your data processing people to continue to use the old forms, the old front-end stuff, and work with the production data while you do work on developing a new front-end. If you split the two, you don't have to take the whole database out of action in order to do work on a form, for example, or to develop a new report or something like that. And then you can just point this front end at the production data, the back end data, and go from there. And instead of calling it the production data, I'm not sure, in a study, you might want to call it a different name than the production data. I mean, the real study data set, something like that. Okay, so we're going to talk a little later about QuestGen. For the back end, the data tables, they use MySQL, which is a enterprise database which is open source. So now the whole purpose of this course is to help you actually do your research project. And some of you are starting a research project or have a small one going and have run into some data management problems. So the question is, how do you develop your research study database? And one of the questions is, should you start by developing the tables, which are back-end things, and then develop forms to collect the data in the tables, or should you start with the forms? And although I say it doesn't matter, frankly, you should start with the forms. I've now helped enough people develop their research study databases that it's pretty clear that investigators find it easier to think in terms of forms and then think in terms of the data tables that will store the information from those forms than the other way around. However, it is not true that you need one table per form in your back-end database, nor is it true. You could put data from multiple forms in the same table, and you could put data from multiple tables onto the same form. And we saw an example of that in the form that you developed in Lab 1, where you actually took data from the subject table and the exam table and put them on the same form. You guys all remember back to Lab 1. It was, 3 weeks ago? I see like 2 people nodding their heads. First of all, you may not need data management help having taken this class. In fact, a lot of you are now your department's data management expert or your division's data management expert, just like a lot of you are already your division's biostatistics expert, and people are already coming to you for help, okay? But before they come to you for help, or before you come to somebody else for help, you should do a little homework. The first thing you should do is search the internet and ask other researchers for already developed data collection forms. And this is something that's easy to do. They have contact information in the journal articles. You email the investigator, and I've had very good luck with them sending me back their data collection forms. Don't reinvent the wheel. Also, sometimes they're just available with the journal article, especially. A lot of them they'll have a web appendix. It's electronically available appendix to the journal article, and then you can just go to the electronically available appendix and boom, there's all their data collection forms. And then you can modify those and use them. And you had an assignment to do something like that in designing clinical research. Okay, once you've done that homework, okay, then you should draft your own data collection form, okay? And then, and you can just put it on paper if you want, and then test it with dummy subjects, or even better, with real study subjects, but they're de-identified. They're not people who you're actually going to enroll in your study, but they're people who would be enrolled in your study if your study had already started. And you can put de-identified data into your forms without CHR approval. Okay, and then you should go to the next step and take the data off of your paper data collection forms and actually put it into a table. And you could make the table using Excel. I often do that, even though for me it's just as easy to use Access. Or you could put it in Stata or Word. But the point is that each blank on the form is usually a column in the table, and each form is usually a row in the table. Okay, and start thinking about that. And as you do that, what you can do is start thinking about a data dictionary, which you'll remember is a list of all the columns in your table with an explanation for what the piece of data is in that column, what type of data it is. Is it a number? Is it text? Is it a date? Or is it an object?